managing principal of Involution, a company that provides Scrum and Agile training and coaching. Ken has done a lot of road work because he's usually out on the road doing coaching and training. He's trained over 20,000 people. He's worked with over 200 companies coaching. He is a certified Scrum trainer, and he has a lot of knowledge. We all know that I have his book right here. I brought it with me. You'll have a chance to read that and look through it. He is also one of the first managing directors for Scrum Alliance, so we're excited that he's back here with us in New Orleans. So with great pleasure, we want to welcome Ken Rubin, our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Have you ever gone to a restaurant where you can see the available tables and they won't seat your party? Did you ever wonder why? Let me tell you a story. Many months back, I took my family out to a restaurant. It's a typical burger, salad, all-you-can-eat fries place near me in Colorado. And I have 2 teenage boys and a wife who loves fries. We'd been there before. It was a holiday that's important. So we show up at the restaurant, and it's not really busy, so they immediately seat our party. I'm happy about that. And we sit down, we start having a family conversation. After about 10 minutes, my son says to me, "Hey, Dad, no one's come by the table yet," which is kind of unusual. And I'm looking around. I'm trying to catch the eye of the server, see if she'll come by. A couple minutes later, she does come by, and she wants to take our drink order. And we just get water, so we're like, yeah, we're ready to order food. She looks a little surprised by that, so we order our food. She goes away. We continue our conversation. It's now another 15 minutes later. And, oh, by the way, in this restaurant, you can order some fries early because it keeps the kids happy. They can munch on fries while they're waiting for dinner. There's still nothing has come to the table. At about the 30-minute point, she finally comes out, and she brings the food. All right, we start eating. About 3/4 of the way through the meal, she shows up to refill the waters. Everybody's parched by now, having salty fries and ketchup. And at that point, she refills, and then she said the following to us. "I'm really sorry about tonight. There's only 2 of us working, and it's a holiday, so we didn't really expect a lot of people to be in here, but more people have shown up than we had expected. So we're a little crushed here tonight," and sort of excused it away and left. At the end of the meal, when the check came, we were getting ready to leave. The manager came by, and the manager said essentially the same thing. "How were things tonight?" I said, "Well, honestly, it didn't quite meet expectations, right? You were a little slow in the service. When the food came out, the things that should have been hot really weren't hot. The things that really should have been cold really weren't cold." And he kind of explained it away also. "Well, this is a holiday night. We're a little light on staff. We didn't expect this many people to show up." "Well, I'm trying to teach my kids Scrum. I'm trying to teach them Agile." So I decided I would put on my Scrum Master hat. So I decided I'll ask him a couple questions. So the first question I asked him was, when you saw more people were showing up than you had anticipated, why didn't you just call in some additional staff? Right? And he said, "Well, it's a holiday, and people probably already have other plans, and it was probably too late to get anybody in here." An assumption, of course, that he chose not to validate. Right? And then I asked him the second question. When you saw more people were arriving than you thought you could seat, why did you keep seating them? And he actually seemed a little baffled by the question, right? And I'll summarize his response. This isn't word for word, but it's pretty much what he said. He goes, "Look, this is a chain restaurant, and he's the manager of this particular restaurant." And he basically said, "Well, I was trained that when a customer shows up, if table available, seat customer. When next customer shows up, if table available, seat customer. If next customer shows up and table not available, then quote time that customer will have to wait. And make sure it's a small amount of time, not a large amount of time, so they don't leave." Okay, that last part was mine based on experience. All right. So at that point, I realized this is going to go nowhere. So he left. We got up. We were leaving. And as I was walking out of the restaurant, there was another family that were putting on their coats, and I heard them complaining also about the horrible service they had got. Okay. Oh, by the way, that's the restaurant. So you get an idea of what it was looking like. All right, so let's look at what happened here. Let's summarize what just took place. The restaurant and the manager really failed to grasp some fundamental principles of how to run a profitable restaurant in the long term. I mean, I'm not very inclined to want to go back to this restaurant. In fact, I haven't been back since because of the bad service I got. They really failed in this respect to evaluate the specific actions they were taking, seating all these people at the restaurant, without the context of sort of a greater economic framework for evaluating. I mean, I am certain that the profitability of that restaurant that evening was very high. The revenue was probably quite high, and their expenses were low. They didn't have enough people working that night, so it probably looked like a rather profitable night. So they're probably patting themselves on the back. Your regional manager's probably saying, great job. But they missed the point. They offended a long-term customer who would typically go once every couple weeks to this restaurant, in addition to probably everybody else in the restaurant, meaning they missed the point. Why does a good restaurateur not seat you? Because they know if they seat you and they don't have enough capacity, you're going to get bad service. And it's actually much worse than that. If they're actually foolish enough to seat our party at that table, you know what's going to happen to the service of every other table in the restaurant, right? It's happened to everybody here. Everybody gets bad service. They missed the bigger picture. That's the thesis I'm going to offer you today, right? That many organizations actually do really good team-level Scrum, yet they don't get the desired business results. Why? They fail to grasp the fundamental principles that underlie what they're doing and apply them in an economic framework so they can make sensible choices. They make what appears to be locally optimized choices, seat the people at the table, and they haven't thought about the bigger picture of what the real consequences of that truly are. So, well, we'll see if you agree at the end, right? But I do appreciate the feedback. So my hope is that in 90 minutes, when you walk out of here, right, that I will have been able to show you the 3 principal inhibitors that I see to organizational success with Scrum. I mean, when Anita introduced me, she said I spend my time on the road. I'm usually with 1 or 2 different companies every week somewhere around the world doing training or coaching. I get to see a lot of what's working and what isn't working, and I've been able to sort of distill that down to 3 things that I see that are common. And I'm going to show you how you can apply economically sensible Scrum to deal with them. That's our journey today. Here's a quick overview of the Scrum framework. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I just need to pull out a couple ideas to reference. This is from my Visual Agile Lexicon. It's in your book. The way you read this picture is on the left side of the picture, there's our product owner. The product owner has this great vision. That's the blue cube of the thing they want to build. Well, the blue cubes are rather grand, so they're not going to build it all in one short duration sprint of a couple weeks. So through a process called product backlog grooming, we take the blue cube and we start refining it down into more detailed, more specific features, in this case, the blue bricks, if you will, right? So we do this grooming process. The gray looping arrow that dominates the center of that picture, that's a sprint. The first thing that happens in a sprint, of course, is sprint planning, where those 2 orange connecting arrows define a capacity. How much work do we think we can get done? And then the goal is you pull items, ready items, off the top of that product backlog to reasonably occupy the capacity to get work done that sprint. A lot of teams will generate a sprint backlog as a way of acquiring confidence. Hey, do you really think you can get those 3 items done? Well, they usually want to look at it at a task level. So blue bricks in this picture are product backlog items. Green cubes are tasks. So collectively, those 2 are sprint planning. Sprint execution is where we do the hands-on work, the design, build, test, integrate work. To get those stories done every day during sprint execution, we do a daily Scrum meeting. At the end, in Scrum, we have a potentially shippable product increment or a potentially releasable product increment, meaning we build a part of the blue cube. We didn't build the whole blue cube. We weren't trying to build the whole blue cube in one short duration sprint, but the piece that we build is supposed to be done according to some definition of done. And then, as everyone knows, the last 2 activities in every sprint are both inspect and adapt activities. The first is the inspect and adapt on the product, the sprint review, and then the inspect and adapt on the process, the sprint retrospective. And then we come around and we do it again. All right, so there's a 90-second summary of Scrum. Now, here's what I'm going to argue. If you do that and you do it well, it's necessary, but it won't be sufficient, right? It's not going to be sufficient to be successful Scrum. You really have to do what I'm going to call economically sensible Scrum. And of course, I'm going to define what I mean by that. All right, now in the picture you just saw, let me carve it up for you a little bit. The term I used to refer to the elements in that picture were practices. Scrum has a set of practices. Here are the roles that are there: product owner, Scrum Master, development team, sprints, sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint execution. These are practices, meaning if every organization here is doing Scrum, and you say, yeah, I'm doing Scrum, I should be able to walk into your company and see all these practices. How you do those practices might differ company to company or even team to team within the same company. That's okay. Scrum's a framework, right? Each team is supposed to figure out how best to make that framework work in their context. And they do that using what I'll call approaches. I'm listing here some common approaches, like user stories. I think people understand that user stories are not required to do Scrum. It just happens to be the most common approach that most teams would choose to use when they're doing Scrum, as is planning poker. Again, you're not even required to estimate in Scrum, but if you choose to do so, a lot of teams, when they put sizes on product backlog items, might choose to use planning poker. It's an approach. It's not required that you do that. And I'm showing my approach for doing release planning and how I do sprint reviews. My approach, right? Your approach might look like that. It might be different. It's okay. As long as it works contextually for you, it's the right approach for you. All right, so we have practices and we have approaches. Now, I'm sure a number of you have heard the term Scrum butt. I'm not actually sure if that's with one T or two T's, to be honest, right? Now, when people use the term Scrum butt, what they're usually talking about is, in some way, we have violated the Scrum framework. It usually sounds like this: we do Scrum, but sprints are 8 weeks long. We do Scrum, but we don't have a product owner. Or we do Scrum, but we do our daily Scrum on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. What part of daily didn't come across there? We do Scrum, but sprint planning takes 2 days. I was with a company last week that said that to me. You get the idea. So when people refer to things like Scrum, but they mean stuff like this. Here's a question for you. Be careful, they're going to take a picture of you. Right? What if we had no violations at all? What if you did textbook Scrum at the team level? You did all the practices we just laid out. You used good, proven approaches to do it. The question remains, would you be successful with Scrum? And I'm making the argument, not necessarily. Of course you could be. I'm just saying, my experience is I see far too many teams, far too many organizations that aren't being successful with Scrum because, like our restaurant analogy, they're failing to grasp some rather important points. So I promised you I would explain the 3 inhibitors that I see to the successful application of Scrum. The first, what I would call ignorance or misapplication of core principles during development. I'm going to be explaining all 3 of these, of course. The failure to apply agile principles throughout the value chain. Oh, we're just going to do agile over here in development, right? The rest of the organization, they can continue to do things in the way they have historically continued to do them, because that's always worked out brilliantly. Failure to structure teams in what I'll call an economically sensible way. Okay, as I said, I'm going to define it. Here's the real takeaway. If you don't apply core principles in an economically sensible way, you will fail, just like they did in the restaurant. They failed to apply common sense principles to what they were doing, even though locally it seemed perfectly reasonable, and they harmed long-term customer value. Let me explain each. All right? Let me set this up a little bit. When I refer to agile principles, I'm referring to things like these. Now, I'm not going to go through all these principles here. We don't have the time, but since you all have a book, this is chapter 3. Right? I feel comfortable. No, thank the Scrum Alliance. They made the book available, right? So this is chapter 3 in the book. Now, things like variability and uncertainty, prediction and adaptation, these are categories of principles. I'm going to illustrate a few of them, but not all of them. But here's really my point. These principles provide the context for inspecting and adapting what you're doing. if you don't really understand the principles, you're just going through the motions. And you don't understand when it would be appropriate to change approaches by having done that. So, in a sense, in summary, people who apply Scrum but really don't understand these core principles really do lack an important context. I plan to illustrate that. In addition, if you apply these principles well, you will be able to operate in both a robust and at times anti-fragile manner. Now, of course, I'm going to have to define something here. I'm borrowing the term antifragile by a book by Nassim Taleb called Antifragile. In that book, he defines a triad. The first part of that triad is fragile, things that are harmed by randomness, things that are harmed by disorder. A crystal glass on the table is fragile, right? Because if you bump the table and the glass were to fall on the floor, it's likely going to break. So that glass doesn't like randomness. It likes to be on the shelf in your china closet, never touched. Right? Fragile. Now, a lot of people, when they hear fragile, if I say, what is the opposite of fragile? I'd say most people's initial response to that would have been robust. That which is robust is not fragile. Not quite. Things that are robust are resilient to uncertainty. They're resilient to disorder. If I put a metal can on the table and you bump the table and the can fell on the floor, it's probably not going to break. It's robust to disorder in the environment, but it didn't benefit by having been bumped off the table. So the opposite of fragile, things that are harmed by disorder, is anti-fragile, things that actually benefit from disorder. An example, the body's immune system. When presented with a low-level stress of a particular pathogen, the immune system actually gets stronger, so that if you're ever hit full-on with that pathogen, you're in a better position to defend yourself. So in that respect, being in an environment with disorder, this is why parents who shield their child from every possible anomaly that might ever happen are only fragilizing them, right? They need to be anti-fragile against things like that. So here's where I'm going with this. I think something like a waterfall approach is a very fragile approach to building products, meaning in the presence of uncertainty and disorder, things will break, and they will likely break in a large way. Now, the question is, what is agile? There's been some debate on this. I'm going to take a somewhat intermediary position. I think agile is frequently robust. In agile, we are frequently robust to the uncertainty in our environment. We don't necessarily benefit from it, but we're not harmed by it by what we do. There are times, though, I think we're anti-fragile. I'll give you an example. Fast feedback, a core agile principle, get fast feedback. Well, in an environment where you're building a product and it's not 100% certain what you ought to be building, your ability to get fast feedback on what you're building can prune a bad path quickly and can help you exploit an emergent opportunity fast. You actually get better in the presence of fast feedback. So in that respect, agile is anti-fragile. So I want this benefit. I want that. If we fail to embrace the core agile principles that underlie what we're doing, we're going to lose the ability to be robust and anti-fragile at times when it's very important, because we, unlike other environments, work in a world of high uncertainty, high disorder. So wouldn't it be nice to be robust or at least benefit from it as to always be harmed by it? Again, teams that just do Scrum who haven't embraced these principles aren't getting the robust and anti-fragile benefits. More on this to come. So what is economically sensible Scrum? Let me explain the picture. The top part, that's the Scrum framework. But that Scrum framework has to reside on the pillars of the core principles. Doing Scrum without understanding those core principles, as I said, is a dangerous thing to do. Now, the last part of the framework that I'm about to describe is the economic framework at the bottom. Those principles themselves have to be grounded in a core economic framework so that we make sensible trade-offs. Right? We all know that product development is in large part the art of making sensible trade-offs. If we don't have a framework in place to make the decisions, it'll be difficult. Let me take that concept a little bit further. See, I think economics is the universal language of product development. I think everybody needs to speak it. I don't care if you're a manager, a developer, a tester. It doesn't matter to me, because we all make trade-offs, and we all have to evaluate the economics of those choices. And if you want to have a conversation across all those different disciplines, economics should be your Babelfish, should be your Esperanto, right, for doing all this, the universal language. So by economic framework, I'm borrowing this concept from Donald Reinertsen in his book, Flow. Here's the idea. We have a lot of different goals that we might have, like reduce waste, or improve cycle time, how quickly we can get things done, or improve customer sat, or deal with variability or uncertainty in our environment, or create innovative solutions, or improve quality. These are all notable goals to go after. The problem, of course, is that each of those particular things, and even within a given category like waste, they tend to be measured in different units. So I got a question, right? We're going to go work on, you allocate the money in the company, and I come to you, work on my project first, and you say, why? My project generates $500,000 of revenue in Q2. Someone else walks into your office. No, work on my project first. You go, why? Oh, because mine increases customer sat by 5%. Which one should we do first? They're in totally non-comparable units of measure, right? We need to transform each of the proxy variables into a normalized unit, and the normalized unit I'm offering up here is life cycle profits. Right? What is a 5% increase in customer sat worth in terms of life cycle profits? Once I convert all these different measures into a normalized unit of measure, I can do the comparison. I can weigh them very quickly against one another to know which would have been the better one to have done. So I need to have this framework at the foundation so I can make sensible trade-offs as opposed to just guessing. In that example, the standard approach would probably be in most companies for choosing? I'd call that NPF, noisiest person first. Whoever yells and screams the loudest in your face, just do that to shut them up. Right? This is probably a rather poor scheduling algorithm. Right? Imagine if you had children and you applied that algorithm with them. Whichever child screams the loudest and demands the most, just do that to shut them up. Yeah, see what behavior that promotes. All right, so we need this economic framework. Let me give you some examples. I don't care what kind of organization you are in. You're interested in eliminating waste, right? You're not interested in eliminating waste? Of course you are. The issue is obvious. There's multiple forms of waste in any organization, and they frequently trade off, right? So you're not going to be able to eliminate all of them or even reduce all of them simultaneously, because frequently as one goes down, another goes up, right? So if you can't compare the different forms of waste in similar economic terms, how would you know which was the better form of waste to have eliminated? You might actually eliminate the wrong form of waste. That would be unfortunate. Talk about suboptimizing your economics. Let's do an example, cost of delay, right? Let's say, take the scenario I have at the top. What if you had to wait? Let's say you outsource your work to a UX team. If you have to do any UX work on your project, you have to carve that piece out and give it to the UX team. And you have to wait 3 weeks. The current lead time for the UX team is 3 weeks from the time you request till you'll get anything back. Now, you could eliminate having to go to the UX team if you would put a UX designer on your team. The question is, which would be the better choice? You can't really answer that until you understand what the cost of delay is, right? Well, what does the 3 weeks cost me, right? And put it into the same economic terms as the cost of putting somebody on the team. And when I start to compare them, I get a rather good idea of, was it a good idea to put somebody on the team or not? So I have to have that framework. And the cost of delay comes in a lot of times. Would you be willing to trade off money for lead time? Heck, I have this option almost every week. So I do a lot of training classes. I usually get my materials printed at a local FedEx office. If I procrastinate and I wait till Sunday night for a Monday class, and I call up the FedEx office, I got to have 30 books printed by tomorrow, they might say, no problem, for an expedited charge. I can spend money to buy time, right? That's a trade-off I could make, and I have to decide, was it worth spending that money or not? In product development, you have this trade-off all the time, right? You have to decide. Or what about lead time for variability? When are you going to be done on this project? When are you going to be done? And you might say, we'll be done end of September. Craig, what's your confidence in that estimate, by the way? Oh, that is our 50% confidence interval. Oh, so what you're saying is half the time you're going to miss the date, right? All right, give me your 90% confidence estimate. Well, if I was 50% confident by the end of September, I'm thinking I'll be 100% confident by the end of the year. Should we take it? Should we take end of year as the target date to reduce the variability in the schedule, right? I have far less variability at the end of December than I have at the end of September. Was it worth the lead time, though? I don't know. You know how software works, right? Parkinson's law kicks in. Work expands to fill the time available to get the job done. The moment you say end of December in software, that's your best case now. All right? Even if September was 50% probable, December is probably now your best case. So you just gave up 3 months to reduce the variability. Was it worth it? I don't know. Until you can tell me what the cost of the delay was for those 3 months and compare it against what's the value of having the reduction in variability, two of those non-compatible units at the top of that previous picture, and put them in the same units of measure, there's no way you'll answer that question other than guessing. So I'm motivating why you have to have that economic framework at the foundation of what you're doing, or you can't make informed choices, you can merely guess. And I don't think we want to guess our way through product development. Okay. Now, having motivated what is economically a sensible Scrum, I want to show you how we can apply it to deal with the 3 big issues that I see. Right? Remember, the first of them was ignorance or misapplication of core Agile principles during development. I bet some of these are going to look rather familiar to you. You ever have this one in your company? The misunderstanding of when change occurs? You got the business people over here saying, I love Scrum. I can change things anytime I want. Right? You got the developers over here shaking in their boots. Oh, holy crap, they can't just change things whenever they want. Both of them locked onto the same core Agile idea. What was the Agile idea? We embrace change. Embrace change, right? Well, they saw embrace change. I can change it anytime I want. They heard it and said, wait a minute, that's not what that meant. How do we reconcile it? We embrace economically sensible change. Think about it for a moment. Yes, of course we embrace change. That's a key element, right? We don't want to run down the wrong path just because we said we were on the first day when we had the worst possible knowledge we were ever going to have of the project, right? We want to adapt when that happens. But if you think about it, think of what your investment is. Look at the economics. While you're getting a story ready in the backlog, you're doing some grooming. You've made some investment in a story. Initially, it was the minute it took you to write the card and hang it up on the wall. Not much of an investment, right? So if I end up changing and not doing it, I'm throwing out 1 minute of work, big deal. But as I start getting it ready to the point where it might enter the stage of to-do, meaning I bring it into sprint planning, my investment's gone up. I've invested more in the story at sprint planning because I was breaking it down into tasks and other things like that. As we actually start doing the work, our investment goes up even further, and of course, by the time you finish it, you've made the full investment. You're done. What I'm saying is, yeah, you can make change, but understand what the cost of that's going to be along that curve. So, hey, business, if you want to walk in here in the middle of the sprint and demand that we start making changes, understand there's a real cost for doing that. Did anybody say change was free? We just said we would embrace change, right? If you want to do crazy things, you can ask for them. So I imagine a number of your companies have this problem. What about this one? The misunderstanding of just in time. Everybody knows Agile means just in time. Last responsible moment. Got it. So here we are on the development side. We love Scrum. We can do everything just in time. I can't tell you the number of times I walk into a company, management pulls me aside and they'll say this, is it true that they can't predict anything, that they won't give me any schedules, anything at all, because Agile is just in time, right? They're saying, this is Agile. We don't have to do that. Okay? I got one person in favor of that. Yeah, they're having the reverse reaction. That sounds like total chaos to me. Of course, Agile isn't all just in time. That makes economically no sense. You got to balance how much predictive upfront work you're going to do with adaptive just-in-time work. Right? Agile didn't say don't do anything up front. The principle is upfront work should be helpful, just not excessive. What, you think you showed up at sprint 1 and the trolls met you there and magically handed you your product backlog groomed and ready to go? You did some work before you showed up at sprint 1, right? Now, how much work you did up front will likely depend on a number of factors, some of which I've listed at the top of the slide. I mean, A number of years ago, I was doing a class at JPL. So I'm at the Jet Propulsion Lab. I put this slide up. A couple guys, this was like 2 weeks before Curiosity landed on Mars. And there's a couple guys in the back of the room. They're kind of chuckling when I put this slide up. And they're like, I didn't realize there was anything funny about the slide. And they're like, yeah, you can be pretty sure before we put the $2.7 billion rover on the rocket and blasted it into space, we probably did a little bit more of this than we did of that, right? I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I get it, because once the rover's on the rocket, you don't really get an opportunity to make a lot of change. I mean, you can upload some new software commands, but you're not going to fundamentally change the mission, right? So, all right, yeah, they did some system engineering work up front. Hey, if it was your $2.7 billion, you probably would have done the same thing. And by the way, for most of you, it was. All right? But, on the other hand, I have a website called Comparative Agility, and I'm a little bit more this way. Why? Because cost of change for me isn't in the $2.7 billion range, right? It's a little bit less. You just have to find the right balance point for every project. No one said, if you were overly aggressive on either side of that teeter-totter, I bet you're unhappy. You're overly aggressive on the predictive end, I bet you dip into the guessing pool. Oh, you're just guessing. You don't really know. How could you know that up front? On the other hand, if you tried to do everything just in time, I bet it feels chaotic. There's always a balance here, right? No one said go one way or the other. That's the misunderstanding. Oh, this is one of my favorites. The failure to recognize inventory as a critical asset that needs to be measured and tracked. Here's the issue. If you think about manufacturing, in manufacturing, inventory is both physically visible and financially visible. It's physically visible in an obvious way, right? I can walk into the factory, I can touch the stuff. There it is. I know if we have more inventory this week than last week, I can see bigger piles of stuff on the floor. It's also financially visible. Hey, CFO of a manufacturing company, how much inventory do you have in manufacturing this week? How much is in the factory this week? This guy's going to give you an immediate answer to that. We got $500,000 of inventory in the factory. Why? It's a critical variable. You track that in manufacturing. Neither of those characteristics are true for us. Our inventory is both physically invisible and financially invisible. It's physically invisible in a somewhat obvious way, right? Most of our inventory in product development, bits on a disk. The code out there on some server, right? The test cases that go with that. I could print that stuff up, put it into a filing cabinet, and make it a little bit more physical, or I could hang some Post-it notes up on the wall. Again, makes it a bit more physical, but I'm sorry, no one's going to confuse my Post-it notes up on the wall with that stuff piling up on the floor. They're not physical in the same way. And ours is also financially invisible. Hey, CFO of a product development company, how much inventory do you have in product development? None. Wrong. You have inventory all over the place. Question. How do you manage something you can't see? So what do we do instead? We manage what we can see in organizations. What can we see in organizations? Well, waste. What's the most common form of waste in a software development organization? Your software. Can't argue that, right? Once I buy you your computers to do your work, and I buy you whatever software you need on the machine to do your job, what is my real big cost that's left? Your salaries. Your salaries, right? So the big waste that most organizations can see is underutilization waste. Let's take this for a ride for a moment. I hire you in to do testing. I pay you 100% salary to do testing. There's sort of an expectation here that you're going to be testing 100% of your available time. True? Okay. I hire you in. I assign you to a project. That project needs you 60% of your time. If I stop there, right, it's going to appear like there's a 40% underutilization of the tester. Now, my management, by the way, probably measures me on how utilized I keep you. So if I stop at one project at 60%, that's not going to look good. So what am I going to do to solve this problem? Yeah, welcome to project number 2. Oh, by the way, project 2 needs you 30% of your time. Okay, good, I got you up to 90%. Well, heck, it works so well for 2 projects. Let's say hi to 3. All right, clever me. I have eliminated idle tester waste. I look good. My management give me an old attaboy on the back. Good job keeping them busy, because everybody knows idle hands are evil hands. Yeah, let's see what the cost of that decision was. Watch the baton, not the runners. All right, let me explain what I mean by that. Let's apply my let's keep them 100% busy strategy to the 4x100 meter relay race at the Olympics. Okay? Now, my first observation of that race is going to be, this is a very inefficient race. No, it is. I pay those ladies 100% salary to run. Each one runs 25% of the time. No, I have a 75% underutilization of my runners. That won't do. So what should I do about it? Of course, they're going to look at me and go, yeah, what do you want me to do when I'm not carrying the baton? I don't know. There's like, run up and down the stands. No, they're supposed to run, right? So I need them running. Oh, actually, no. I have a much better suggestion. You're going to love this one. There's another racetrack over there. You should run another race over there while you're waiting for the baton over here. Clever me. I have eliminated idle runner waste. Completely missing the point. In that race, you don't win the gold medal by keeping your runners busy. You win the gold medal because you got the baton across the finish line first. Now, if you drop your baton on the ground, you don't win the race. Leading to the observation, we are watching the wrong thing. In that race, you don't watch the runners. You watch the baton. Now I can translate this back for us. The baton, that's the work that has to flow across our teams, across, I'll call it our system. I mean, by system, the collection of teams and how we put them together to do Scrum. It has to flow across that. If the baton ends up on the ground, that is the work that got blocked. And you know what it sounds like, right? Because I'm sure it happens in some company you've been with. My team is blocked and cannot move forward because I'm waiting on your team to do a piece of work. Until your team does that work, we're blocked. My baton is now inventory in their queue. That's the inventory that's building up all over product development at an enormous cost. But we're managing the other thing. We're managing trying to keep people busy, because idle hands are evil hands. And what we should be measuring and managing is the inventory, and I'll explain why. Take a look at the graph. I borrowed the graph from queuing theory. You don't need to know anything about queuing theory to know the graph is correct. All you have to do is own a computer. What happens when you run your machine at 100% CPU, 100% memory utilization? Nothing happens, right? Okay. Why? Because you entered the high queue state. You're all the way up here. If you find, and by the way, once you get into the high queue state, you're screwed. It's really hard to get out. Absolutely, right? It's hard to get out of the high queue state. So at that point, you're probably opening up Task Manager and killing jobs or rebooting or something, right? But you got to get out of that state. Look at the problem. Notice where the curve goes up, 80%. This is why people who manage server farms for a living never run their servers above 80% utilization. Could you imagine the conversation, how silly it would be? I'll be the executive. The server guys walk into my office. We need to buy some more servers. Why? What's the utilization of your current servers? Oh, we're at 80%. Get out of here. Come back when you're at 100%. Everybody knows it's going to happen. We're going to ground the company all the way down. The math above 80 is easy. Go from 80 to 90% in that graph, double the queue size. Go from 90 to 95%, double the queue size again. 95 to 99, double it yet again. You don't want to be anywhere near that part of the curve, right? Here's why. Queue size equals inventory equals cost of delay. All right? You know it's true, right? If you went to Starbucks this morning and you walked in and they were 80% utilized, you had 3 people in queue in front of you. We can all do the math. See, there's 3 people in front of me. It's taking them about 2 minutes per person. Okay, I'll wait. You go in and they're 99% utilized, there's 19 people in front of you. You do the math again, you turn around, you walk out. Queue size equals delay cost. Now for the killer. We worked really hard to reduce one form of waste, underutilization, took it to 0. The cost of that was queue size goes up. Batons are flying everywhere onto the ground, right? queue size goes up. When you compare these in the same economic units of like life cycle profits, what you'll find is that having a little bit of underutilization, a little bit of slack in your system, which is maybe in thousands to tens of thousands of dollars, is being traded off against a cost of delay, which is probably in hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. We're absolutely looking at the wrong thing. But yet I go into organizations that these Scrum teams are all set up, but above them at the management level, they've already made decisions guaranteeing that these people are going to be on multiple teams all over the place, batons are going to be flying everywhere, and they can't get anything done because they're being blocked every time they turn around. More on this when we get to the last piece on setting up economically sensible teams. Now, just to be clear, because sometimes this gets misunderstood, I'll tell you what I didn't say here. I did not say keep your people 80% utilized. I didn't want anybody running out. He said at that presentation, it's not what I said. I'll tell you what I said. I don't care about the utilization of my people. It's not the variable I'm focused on. What I am focused on is the fast, flexible flow of the work across the system. That's what I'm focused on. This is a piece that most organizations miss, right? When work gets presented in the system, new ideas, bug fixes, they have to figure out what structure of teams they're going to put in place to flow the work across the system to get to the results they want to deliver, and do that with end-to-end cycle time. What I'm interested in is click to click on that stopwatch, right? Here's the sad part for me, and I bet some of you have the same experience. I go to a lot of large companies. Anytime we've ever done something the equivalent of a value stream map in those companies, meaning where the work gets presented to the system, click the stopwatch. That stopwatch is running, right? Customer already asked, so click happened. That watch runs until you deliver it, click again. What I'm saying is anytime we've done that value stream map, the batons were on the ground up to 90% of the time. Are you freaked out yet? 90% of the time, the work wasn't moving. Imagine my surprise when I walk in and some manager pulls me aside and goes, boy, I sure hope when you're done, you can help my teams be like 10% more efficient at applying Scrum. Right, seriously? That's the problem you would like to solve? Do a little math with me. If 10% of the time the work is flowing, 90% of the time it's blocked, and you squeezed a 10% improvement out of the 10% of the time you were doing the work, you'd move the needle 1%. If you squeezed a 10% improvement out of your system, how you organize those teams, you'd immediately squeeze out a 9%. We are clearly looking at the wrong thing. You want to do Scrum well at scale, you better worry about the fast, flexible flow across your system design. Otherwise, you won't get it. So more on this to come. Okay. Planning. Well, economically sensible planning, right? Yeah, we have to plan, but we have to do it in a reasonable way. I mean, obviously in Agile, we agree that up front we won't get the plans right. If you're in an organization that doesn't believe that, you have a more fundamental problem, right? But we have to agree on that. But look, just because we can't get them all right up front doesn't mean we shouldn't do any upfront planning, right? We said upfront work should be helpful, just not excessive in what we're doing. Find the balance, right, between how much upfront, how much just in time. Of course, we want to keep our planning options open until the last responsible moment. I don't want to decide any sooner than I have to, right? On the first day of the project, agree or disagree with this comment. On the first day of the project, brand new project, that is the day you're going to have the worst possible knowledge you will ever have of that project. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, a lot of thumbs up. Sure, I mean, isn't it reasonable for me to assume every subsequent day on that project you're going to be a little smarter about what you're doing, not a little dumber? Please say yes, right? I mean, I grant you, if half the team quits in the middle of the project collectively on that day, we got dumber, but assume for the moment that didn't happen, right? Yeah, so you want to keep your options open on these critical decisions until you have better information rather than make it when you have the worst possible knowledge you'll ever have. We focus more on adapting and replanning than conforming to plan. On traditional projects, right, you put a project plan up on the wall, and if the teams start to deviate from the plan, isn't the normal reaction in those organizations they have someone like a project manager whose goal is to get you back on plan? There's a presumption in that statement that the plan up on the wall that I put together on the first day when I had the worst possible knowledge is right. Oh, and you guys are wrong. Bad teams, right? More likely, bad plan. So in Agile, we don't do that, right? We focus on replanning and adapting. This reminds me of a quote I saw in the British SAS Survival Guide. I know we've got a bunch of folks here from England. In that guide, it said this: when hiking in the woods and the map and the terrain don't match, in all instances, believe the terrain. All right? Hey, the Brits are sensible people. If you find one, slap them on the back. Good job, right? I mean, of course, right? You know, the map says there's not supposed to be a lake here. I guess there's no lake here. Let's keep going, right? No, in Agile, when the map, the plan on the wall, and the terrain, the actual conditions on the ground during the project don't match, it's time to replan, right? We replan all the time in Agile. We're going to generate planning inventory. Inventory wasn't just work that was blocked in the queue. If I put that large project plan up on the wall, is that not an inventory of project planning artifacts that will either have to be reworked or thrown out when we realize the plan is wrong? Expensive. Don't do that. We favor smaller and more frequent releases. Big things in product backlogs, big things in portfolio backlogs are an economic disaster. Again, most companies violate this instantly. I'll speak more to that in a little bit. And we plan to learn fast, right? In Agile, it's all about getting fast feedback. Why? Because if we're going down the wrong path, I want to pivot. Just because I said I was going down that path doesn't mean I'm going down that path. I'm simply starting down that path. If I have to redirect, I will. So this is planning in an economically sensible way. Now, keep in mind, some of this, in fact, at times a lot of this happens at the level above the individual team. So again, if your team does great Scrum, and this stuff is messed up, you're already behind the 8 ball before you even started. Ouch. How about failure to apply Scrum principles throughout the value chain? Let me illustrate. Here's an example of a value chain. Here's all I'm trying to say. Most of the times, organizations bring Agile into the development organization, into IT. That's where they start. That's a sensible thing to do, right? I mean, it's offered up as an approach to building software products, so do it there. But look, we're surrounded by a lot of other things. How about all the other organizations within our company or other departments that we have to deal with, right? You know, sales, marketing, right? Ops, right? And then we have our legal, HR, and finance that kind of envelops the whole thing. All right, that's a value chain. I'm saying that in most organizations, they stopped at development. And because of that, they won't be successful. For example, I wonder how many of your companies have this issue. Here we are. That's us over here. We're building all the cool stuff, and we're producing potentially shippable product increments every single sprint. They're piling up, by the way. Why? The ops team downstream of us marches to the beat of a different drum. They do whatever they're going to do on whatever frequency they're going to do it, you know, with whatever rules that the VP of that group has put into place. So here we are piling up a lot of inventory of stuff that's done but not shipped. Question, are you really getting the benefits of Agile if you build the stuff and have no capability whatsoever to get it into the hands of your customers? Obviously. So if you get misaligned downstream, you're just going to be buffering up a whole lot of inventory of stuff that really could be delivering customer value, but guess what? It's not. It's sitting there decaying, right? Software decays over time. Right? Bad. How about this one? I wonder how many of you have misaligned internal management. I see this far too often. I'll walk into a company, and you'll hear the management say this to the teams. Oh, yeah, no, you guys can go off and develop using Scrum in an Agile-like way. I'm all perfectly good with that. However, you're still going to have to produce all the same artifacts you had to historically produce in order for me to approve your project so you can even begin on it. So in a sense, what they're saying is, oh, I'm going to need that full requirements document up front. I'm going to need that full project plan up on the wall when you have the worst possible knowledge you'll ever have, right? And all that stuff. Oh, by the way, you guys, you can go do Agile over here. That's your little sandbox. You go play over there. Wow. Talk about being derailed already. I kind of feel like that guy. Trying to be on both sides of the fence at the same time. Be Agile, but don't be Agile. That looks painful to me, right? Now, this is bad, right? We've got to get internal management aligned. Otherwise, we're already, again, behind the 8 ball. So, yes, I have teams that are doing great Scrum, but guess what? We're failing. Okay. Maybe that one seemed obvious because you're experiencing it, or at least some of you are. What happens when the sales team gets misaligned? all right? Have you ever had this happen to you? Sales guy goes out to the pub, comes in the next morning with a napkin. We're going to deliver this awesome FUBAR feature on August 15th for a fixed price of $600,000. Wow, sales guy just sold a contract where he locked down date, scope, and budget. Thank you, right? For over-constraining me, right? That's not the actual napkin, but I've had this happen to me. Years back, I was at a company. Literally, the sales guy went to a pub the night before, comes in the next day, hands me this napkin. Has a description, which I can't really read, with a date and a number on it. I'm like, what's the date? He goes, oh, that's the date you have to deliver it. I'm like, where'd you get the date from? He goes, well, that's when the customer needs it. He put me in a foul mood, right? I think my comment to this guy was something like, yeah, you should never go to a bar to give out a date or pick up a date because you don't know what you're doing. All right? All right? Don't do that. If you're going to go, at least take someone from engineering with you, right? How many companies have this happen to them? All right, all right, that's more hands than I thought. Okay, now I'm scared. Right, I mean, we're already derailed. Then I show up, right, to do training or coaching, like, well, what do you do? They go, what do you think about fixed price contracts? Don't do that. Well, the sales guy already signed one with the date locked down and the scope locked down. I'm like, all right. And they're like, now how do I do agile on that? I'm like, good luck. Right? The biggie of the biggies. If organizations would just address this one first, the return on investment would be so far off the charts as to be ridiculous. But they don't. Portfolio management in most companies is so seriously misaligned that it's almost impossible for excellent Scrum teams downstream to be successful. Now, I'm not going to go through all these. This is chapter 16 in your book. This is portfolio level planning. What I'm offering up here are 11 strategies that you can use to do agile portfolio management so that you are aligned from the very start all the way down into the development team so you are not put in a bad position. 3 of them, we already talked about a bunch of these. 3 of them deal with how do you organize or schedule that list. There's life cycle profits, cost of delay. Don't worry about being overly accurate on your estimates. You can be, don't worry about overly precise. Just be accurate. Usually I give a T-shirt size when it comes to how big are these things. Remember, this is a portfolio backlog, not a product backlog. That's a collection of blue cubes, not blue bricks. That's the whole thing, not the pieces. You have to figure out how to put things in. What's the economic filter that will let you decide, should I do it, not do it? Arrival rate, emergent, smaller and more frequent. All right, I said I was going to come back to this one. I'll touch that one. For some of you, how big are your larger projects? Anybody here work on projects that are more than 2 years in size? All right, keep your hands up if it's more than 3 years. More than 4? Oh, a couple of hands are still up. Elephants give birth in 2. I mean, what could possibly need 4 years? I get it. I mean, I get this all the time, right? But, well, it's like a large infrastructure changeover project, right? It's like, so can you deliver any value anything short of 4 years, or do I have to wait all 4 years before I get anything of value? Sometimes I'll get, we could probably ship some of it before we shipped all of it, but sometimes I'll get, it really is like a large infrastructure changeover project, so until you do the whole thing, right, wow, economic disaster waiting to happen. By example, you ever been on a small 2-lane country road behind a large farm vehicle and you can't get around the farm vehicle? What starts to happen on that road? Yeah, you get like that convoy, right, that's building up behind the farm vehicle, right? So why? I mean, obviously, the farmer's temporarily hogging the road, hogging the resource. Can't blame the guy. He's got to reposition his vehicle. But nonetheless, he is hogging the road. What's the real problem there? All those cars that are queued up behind them that could have gone down the road really fast can't. They're all blocked, right? They're all experiencing a cost of delay. When you sum up the total cost of delay across all the blocked cars, you realize that guy blocking the road is causing severe economic damage. When I lived in California 25 years ago, they passed a law. If you're the slow-moving vehicle on the road and you're blocking at least 5 vehicles behind you, at the next safe point, you must pull over to let them by. That's a sensible law. Nobody does it, but it's a sensible law. Right? But if a cop sees you not do it, he can give you a ticket for not doing it. Why is that sensible? When that truck pulls over, the other cars come around, it minimizes their cost of delay. So it's sensible. Now, translate that back. Put a large product or project into your portfolio. Large products or projects consume large resources for a long period of time. They hog the road, which means all the smaller ones in queue below it are all now delayed. They're all experiencing a cost of delay. When you sum up that total cost of delay, you will very quickly conclude large items in your portfolio are an economic disaster, and there's only one solution. Don't do that. Unfortunately, many of the people in the room don't control that. That's controlled up here. All right? This is why if you don't start embracing Agile through the full value chain, it started at the portfolio level, you're already behind the 8 ball. Right? You've got these huge things blocking everything. And even if you say you can't ship it in any less than 4 years, you still have to break it into smaller, more frequent pieces. Why? So you can sequence some of the smaller pieces below in between the pieces of the larger one. That's the equivalent of the large truck pulling over to the side of the road periodically so that you minimize the cost of delay on the items behind you. This is Agile portfolio management. The output side, we've already talked about. Don't worry about idle workers. You worry about idle work. Most companies violate that instantly. Here's their algorithm for starting work. Let's begin work on product A. Everybody here 100% utilized yet? No? Excellent. Let's begin work on product B. Everybody here 100% utilized yet? I'm going to march down that list till I get everybody here 100% utilized. I got 2 engineers that are 95% utilized. Awesome. Let's start H. That way they can spend their 5% of the time starting to work on the next project, right? And that way they can start more things that they won't finish, more inventory, and have it build up before the other people get here. Because that's always worked out brilliantly in the past. Let's replicate that. That is the equivalent of sitting too many tables at the restaurant at the same time. What did you just do? You slowed down every single project that you were working on. Don't do that. Right? Oh, and then the last one I'll end with here, marginal economics. There's a key Agile principle you have to have, a key strategy. The strategy is fail fast. Fail fast, right? By the way, if in your organization you're not allowed to use the word fail, okay, let me Agilize it for you. Learn quickly and adapt. What does that mean? Question, think about this. If you start working on a project and you subsequently determine it's not worth finishing it, will you finish it? If you spent the first $1 and you decide it's not worth finishing, will you finish it? How many companies will finish it? Anybody here? Some will? Most of you won't. Did you keep your hands down because you hope you'll stop it, or that you know that you'll actually do it? By example, I asked that question. I was teaching this class at a telecom company, and I had like the VP of engineering for the whole telecom company in the class, and I asked the question. He said no. I'm like, no, you must have misunderstood me. I go, let me make up an example. So here's the example I fabricated. You start working on a project you think is going to cost $1 million, and it's valuable to 100% of your users. You start working on it. You've already spent the $1 million. You realize it's going to cost $10 million to finish it, and it's only going to be valuable to 10% of your users. Will you finish it? He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's insane, right? I mean, I fabricated the example so the cost-benefit ratio changed by a factor of 100. It's going to cost 10 times more to do it, and it's going to be valuable to 1/10 of people. Why would you do that? This is like word for word what this guy said to me. He goes, son. I'm like, son? Anybody starts a sentence, son, with me, I know I'm getting schooled, right? He goes, son, let me explain how we do accounting. I'm like, okay. This is what this guy said to me. He goes, I run engineering. If we start working on this project, spend $1 million on it, and we don't deliver it, and we stop, that's $1 million hit against my expense budget. If I spend the other money, move the system into production for 1 day, the entire $10 million cost moves to the business unit, and they can capitalize the expenditure. I'm spending the money. I'm like, okay, I'm shorting your stock tomorrow. Right? That's just insane, right? He can't take into account marginal economics. In Agile, just because we said we were going to start it doesn't mean we're going to finish it. If the economics tell you it's not worth finishing it, you don't finish it. But you got to be able to walk away from sunk cost. And some people, arguably many people, have a very difficult time walking away from that $1 million. So they spend good money after bad. No. All right, so as I said, feel free to dive into Chapter 16 for the complete discussion on this, because that's a 90-minute discussion on that slide. We already said that sales could be misaligned. What about our partners? What happens when we deal with partners on the sort of the fix all the constraint basis? This is bad also. Oh, I wonder how many of you have to live through this. Now I'm hearing, protection of the fiefdoms. So I'm at this one company, they bring me in. This guy brings me in the room. He's a manager of a group. I'm trying to figure out why I'm actually talking to the guy because I wasn't really sure why I was in the room. It dawned on me after a couple minutes. What he wanted me to say was, in the agile adoption that's taking place in your organization won't have to make any changes. He wants me to say this so he can walk out of the room and go, see, the guy we brought in here said I don't have to change anything because he doesn't want to change anything. And I won't say it because he does have to change stuff, right? So he's kind of pissed at me because I won't say it, right? I'm like, but your organization has to do it, right? You're part of the flow of the work across the system. If you don't participate, batons are going to fly everywhere. And then, of course, you got all the other fiefdoms. Oh, and me too. If he doesn't have to change, I don't have to change. And now organizational level Scrum, gone. Because nobody wants to change. I mean, that's just a fact of life, right? Change is hard. Change is difficult. So avoid it whenever you can, right? That's going to be a big problem. I bet many of you are living that today. How about this one? Really the failure to see the whole, the big picture. But you have all these teams, and they're all interested in doing the best job that they can. I don't deny that for a second. I think each team really is interested in doing the best job they can possibly do. But I think as everybody appreciates, that if you optimize every single component in that system, you will likely sub-optimize the system. Right? In systems theory, your goal is to optimize the system, not the individual components. Because oftentimes you have to make trade-offs at the component level to get the optimal system. That is exactly what we need to do when we look at how do we do organizational level Scrum. Sometimes someone's got to take one for the team, right, to make it work at the system level. But I frequently go in and see teams that are very, very focused on optimizing the work that they do, and they pay a very heavy price for this. So failure, this is the last slide on sort of failure to align the rest of the value chain with doing Agile. I just pulled out some examples. My guess is you're sitting there thinking of a good 4 or 5 others that your organization may or may not be suffering from. All right. I said there was 3 things that I see. That was the second. Here's the third. The failure to structure teams in an economically sensible way. All right, let's talk about this. Remember, the goal was fast, flexible flow across the system. The system was the set of teams and how you set them up. Well, first, if we're going to do economically sensible teaming, we have to reduce multitasking, embrace T-shaped skills. Of course, I'm going to describe each of these, right? You have to create and maintain long-lived teams. And then finally, you scale teams based on economics, not dogma. Keep that in mind today as you're going to some other presentations that discuss scaling. That's not a comment about the presentations. I bet you're going to hear some great presentations. I'm just saying keep the economic framework in mind when you're interpreting it so you don't base your decision based on dogma. You base it on the economics of the choice that you have to make. First, I said earlier, it's not about keeping people busy. That's not the goal. I don't try to go out of my way to keep people 100% utilized. I said that. I worry about the fast, flexible flow across the system, and I let the natural equilibrium of utilization handle itself. If that wasn't clear, let me give you an example. I'm going to choose the extreme example, so please don't throw anything at me for choosing the extreme example. Isn't it true we pay firefighters to be idle most of the time? Right. I mean, because we all know if we kept firefighters 100% utilized, when the next fire breaks out, structures will burn, people will die. And as citizens, we said unacceptable. It's unacceptable, right? The cost of delay is too high if the firefighters are utilized. So we pay them essentially to be idle most of the time because when you need them, right? So what I'm suggesting here is, look, if in your organization there's a certain skill set that when you need it, and any delay is really too expensive, then you might not have that person at 100% utilization, right? Because when you looked at the flow of the work across the system and you said, if we get blocked here, that's a disaster, then don't get blocked there, right? So I'm not worried about keeping my people busy at all. If I assigned you to 3 teams to get you to 100% utilization, very likely 2 of those teams are blocked waiting for you. I put you on 3 teams to do testing, right? There is some probability that the other 2 teams are blocked. The cost of that's actually quite high. This is from a fairly famous study by Clark and Wheelwright on the cost of multitasking. In this particular case, this is like nearly a 400-page book. I took out one of the graphs on number of concurrent projects we asked people to work on. How many here are working on more than one project? Wow. Keep your hands up if it's more than 2. Uh-oh, now I'm getting scared. More than 3. Keep your hands up. More than 4? All right. Who's more than 5? I worship you, dude. I don't know how you do it, right? No one, okay. Well, you can see the graph, right? In this study, by the way, the y-axis is showing percentage of time doing value-adding project work. What's not value-adding is the context switching, right? Put down work on project 1, switch over to project 2, pick up, get back into context. So one project, people are about 70% effective. At 2, it went up to 80. Here's where you are by 5. According to this study's data, at 5 concurrent projects, you're doing about 30% of your time is value-adding time. You gave up 40%, 50 if you want to count it from the second. By the way, why did it go up at 2? That seems anomalous. Why is it higher at 2? Right on. That's exactly what the study showed. If you got blocked on one project, having a second one to switch to gave you an incremental improvement. Notice, however, by 3, you gave it all back. So I guess if I was going to cite this study's data and management said to me, well, then how many projects should I put people on concurrently? My guess is you'd say no more than 2, right? But the world's changed since 1992. I don't think it invalidates the study, but I think the world's different. I'm looking around here. A few of us were in the work environment in 1992. Not all of us. Don't show your hands on this one. But I'll tell you what I had on my desktop in 1992. I had a Mac computer and a Sun 360. I had internet. There was no World Wide Web. Didn't exist in 1992. I had FTP Go for an email. That's what I had on my computer in 1992. I'll tell you what I didn't have. In addition to World Wide Web, I didn't have any social media tools. I didn't have any video conferencing. Any of those things that vie for your attention today. I'd argue in today's world, when you account for all that stuff together, you've already eaten up one project. I think the world is worse today than it was in 92 for things vying for your attention. So arguably, you can only work on one of your company's projects once you get past all that other stuff. Be careful here. I love showing this graph to senior management. You need people with T-shaped skills. T-shaped skills. Everybody on the team needs to be vertically deep in some specialty area. If I hired you in to do testing, your vertical specialty would have been testing. But the idea is you should have some breadth to the skill set. Wouldn't it be nice if, in addition to testing, look, I could help out on some minor UI work. I'm not a UX designer. I could do some database work, but I am not a DBA. I can help with some of the documentation, but I'm not a professional tech writer. A little bit T-shaped skills to me. I want my team formed with people who have T-shaped skills. Why? It makes me antifragile in the context of variability of the work presented to the team, meaning I can swarm. If I only have people on my team that are vertically deep, they're I-shaped, they're not T-shaped or something, right? Then I only have one person likely who can work in that vertical specialty area. If I have an overabundance of work this sprint in that vertical specialty area, I could run out of capacity. If I had people with T-shaped skills, some of those people have coverage of that area and they could swarm over. Now look, I didn't say I expect everybody on the team to be able to do every task in the sprint backlog. That'd be nice, right? But I'm not looking for that per se. I'm just saying, wouldn't it be nice if they could do more than this? So how you form the teams matters. Yeah, I have this great Scrum team. What kind of skills do they have on that team? Do they have the right T-shaped skills for the type of work you want to present to that team? By the way, that was out of your control. When's the last time you rolled in the morning and went, yeah, I think I'm going to form a new team today. I'm going to be on it. I want you on it. Managers form the teams, right? By the way, I'm not saying you should do it that way. Maybe we should let teams self-form. Teams self-organize. In most companies, they definitely do not self-form, right? Management does that, so they're responsible for this. And if they do it poorly, we're already behind the 8 ball. What about team longevity? My experience in big companies, they pride themselves at the end of every project on busting up the team and dynamically recomposing a new group. Let me define my terms. A group, a bunch of people who are asked to work together. They share nothing in common other than the T-shirts they printed up with the name of the group on it. A team, a group that's gone through the stages, right? Forming, storming, norming, performing, that kind of stuff. Meaning we've made a real investment in them to get them to be a high-performance team where they trust each other, they have each other's back in a hot situation. So if you went through all the effort to do that, why would you blow apart a high-performance asset because a project came to the end? Wow. Talk about bad economics. Right? So the first thing you want to do is see if you can keep your teams together. So if Team A finished on Product 1, first thing I would ask is, could I move Team A to work on Product 2? Keep the team together. The economics favor long-lived teams over blowing them apart all the time. The unit of capacity in Agile is the team, not the individual. You want to calculate your WIP limit for doing portfolio-level planning? You better answer the question of how many high-performance Agile teams do you have? Telling me you have so many developers and so many testers and so many UX people does not answer that question for me. So we favor long-lived teams. There's SEAL Team 6, right? I mean, these guys work together. They have each other's back. I don't say they don't ever move people around, but they tend to keep them together because the economics favor it. They're more productive. They have shared estimating history, shared velocity history. If you're going to use that stuff during planning, that's important. They got a certain familiarity. You start swapping it around on a fire station or on a SEAL team, you're going to compromise safety, right, when you do that. The equivalent issues would occur for us. So we favor the long-lived teams. All right, let's handle the last piece then. Scaling with multiple teams. Okay, so now my guess is throughout this conference you're going to be thinking about this question. When the scope of the work requires more than a single team to do it, what are you going to do? How will you scale to accommodate the fact that one Scrum team just isn't sufficient, right? I mean, a lot of us work on big stuff. One team of 5 to 9 people on the development team isn't going to cut it. So be thinking about this through the conference. Let's talk about obvious approaches to doing that. The old approach, right? The discipline team. I put all skills of a given type on one team. There's my programming team, there's my UI team, testing team, DBA team. And they each have a manager, right, that oversees that team. Classic sort of silo-based skills all aligned onto a team. And of course, in that model, you would farm out work of a particular type to the team that works on that type of work. Some organizations prefer to do it by location. All right, well, I have a New York team and I have a team in Mumbai. And I don't mix and match, right? So, but it's a larger project. Those teams do have to coordinate, so we might call these coordinating co-located teams. Each team is fully co-located in a geography, but yet they communicate across. That has some obvious advantages that it takes a lot of the time zone issues out of the equation. I think everybody appreciates when it comes to the distributed teams, it's not the fact that we're not physically in the same room that's the problem. It's the time zones that are the problem, right? You start injecting like 12 and a half time zones in between team members, and you have some obvious issues you have to address, and that seems to take care of some of them. But of course, what if each geography had discipline-specific teams? Well, it can't do that, right? Scrum team is cross-functional, all the skills necessary to get the job done. So I couldn't just have that be the testing team and that be the development team, and then do this. Well, I have to do this, rather. I can't do that, because I wouldn't have a full Scrum team in either geography. So maybe we deliberately distribute the team members. I've done that intentionally a lot of times, knowing full well that I was introducing, in that example, 9.5 hours of time zone difference, right, to do it. But we felt it was the right thing to do. So location. Some teams do it by architectural layer. Oh, that's my GUI team. There's my middle tier team. There's my database team. This is an example of the generalized notion of a component team, as was discipline team, by the way. So I'm going to go right to that, because I really want to talk about component versus feature teams. So component team. A component team builds a component. What's a component? It's a reusable asset. As your customer, I do not buy your componentry unless you're in the business of selling componentry. Right? Chances are you sell a product that's made up of these components, and I buy your product. I'll give you an example. I was working with a GPS company a number of years ago, and one of their component teams did routing. They had like 8 guys in the company, and the only thing these guys did would make changes to the routing code. Right? And so if you wanted to add a new feature to the GPS and it involved updating the routing code, you are not allowed to do it. See, they don't want a guy like me in there changing that code because I don't know what I'm doing, and I could break the routing code and all the GPSs on the planet start failing. So they trust the routing team to go into the routing code. So we know why organizations tend to favor component teams, because it gives them reuse and sort of conceptual integrity inside the component. It's going to be coherent in there. So let's look at the issue here. Compare that with feature teams. A feature team. Well, I put a feature in the product backlog. I can pull it out. I can give it to a single team. They have all the skills on the team to get the job done. And a feature would be something like you could show that to a customer. Hey, guys, what do you think about feature A? And they're like, love it. When can I get it? Got to have it. I mean, when I went into Costco to buy a GPS, I didn't go in there to buy a routing component. I went in there to buy a device that gave me audio and visual turn-by-turn instructions on how to get from point A to point B, not a routing component. I buy features. All right. So let's take a look at this. In a feature team, I have a feature. Like I want to remove a product from inventory. As an inventory manager, I want to remove a product from inventory so that I no longer offer it for sale. That's a feature. If you're an inventory manager, you go, yep, I absolutely want to do that. When can I have that feature? It's right in my product backlog. I give it to a feature team. Nice and simple. What if? Oh, and by the way, when they did sprint planning, there's the remove product from inventory story. They would start breaking that down if they wanted to into a set of tasks. Right? There's a UI task, there's maybe a middle tier task, there's a database task that's associated with that. What if you had component teams, like most large organizations do, which, by the way, is why their batons sit on the ground up to 90% of the time. So if you had a lot of component teams, what you would do is what looks like a feature in a component team would be things like remove, if you're the database team, you'd have something in your backlog that says, I need to be able to remove an item from the database. Give me some kind of API that allows me to remove an item from the database. Oh, by the way, I'm the middle tier programmer. That's what I need. That's the service I need you to expose to me. All right, now stay with me because I'm going to have to say it twice. That which is a feature to a component team is a task to a feature team. That which is a feature to a component team is a task to a feature team, right? They think, so here's your component team. Remove an item from the database. They think that's a feature. That's in their product backlog. That's the kind of stuff that's there. That same thing to a feature team would have been that task right over there. Feature teams, that's just task level work. Got to make a change to the database to support removing a product from inventory? Yeah, of course we got to do that. We also have to do some GUI stuff and some middle tier stuff too. We didn't farm that out to 3 separate teams if we were a feature team. If you were a component team, you farmed it out. The real problem now starts to set in. All right, here's the dogma in the industry today. Everybody knows feature teams are good, component teams are bad. So for all you guys out there where you're dropping your batons 90% of the time, stop using component teams altogether. Wow, that's an overly aggressive statement to have made. Do you truly believe there's going to be one approach to scaling that works for all companies, working against all different types of products, given all the cultural differences that are out there? Yeah, that seems a bit aggressive to make that assumption. Let's look at the problem, though. By the way, a lot of the problem is from an overabundance of component teams because it was not the economically sensible choice to ensure good, fast, flexible flow. It got in the way. Let me show why. Here's an item in a product backlog. Let's say I only have component teams. I have 3 component teams down here. That item spans all 3 component areas. So obviously the first thing we have to do is split the feature into 3 smaller pieces, each of which gets farmed out to a component team. Fair. Now, each of these teams has to work on their pieces. If that's the only work that was presented to the system, no harm, no foul. I bet those 3 teams, using something like Scrum of Scrums, figure out how to do their individual pieces, integrate it all back together, and deliver the full feature back. No harm, no foul. That was scale 1. Let's look at scale 2. I have 2 different products, each of which has features that span the component areas. So I have to take each of them and break them into their constituent component pieces and give them to the right component team. Now, that says component area number 1 product backlog. Imagine you're the product owner for component team 1. You now have 2 competing pieces of work this sprint that you have to prioritize, and you have to do them in the right order. while the other teams also have to do their 2 pieces in the right order, so that at the end, all those pieces come back together and I get back my 2 features, which is what I started with. My guess is at scale 2, again, no harm, no foul. You can do it. Oh, heck, let's make it interesting. I won't even attempt to draw the picture. Scale 15. Now you have 15 products. They're all breaking their features up into component pieces. They're all being farmed out to the teams. Now, product owner of component team number 1, how will you prioritize the 15 competing requests to do work in your component area this sprint, do them in the right order, while simultaneously coordinating with all the other product owners in the component teams where they have to do their 15 pieces in the right order, and magically, when you're all done, bring it fully assembled back together? Did I make that sound complicated enough? At scale, you cannot solve this problem. And since so many companies do it, there must be a solution. There is. Here's their solution. Baton, ground. Usually sounds like this. Did you guys get that feature done? No. Why not? Well, I had to split it up into pieces and farm it out to these different teams. Yes, and? Well, all but one of the teams got their piece done. Okay, why didn't the last team get it done? Well, I asked them. I went over and said, hey, how come you didn't get my piece done? And they said, well, because yours was one of 15 competing requests. We had to do work in our component area this sprint, and we didn't deem your work to be the highest priority piece to work on. Congratulations, we have now multiplicatively increased the probability we will drop batons. Before, we had 1 point of failure. I know that usually sounds bad. Not in this case. I give one feature to one team. I say, get it done. They either do or they don't. In that case, I split it into 3. What if I split it into 5 different pieces to give the 5 component teams? I now multiplicatively increase the probability. If any one of those 5 teams fails for any reason whatsoever to deliver their piece, my baton is on the ground. That is why at large scale, at companies that use a lot of component teams, their batons sit on the ground 90% of the time. There is no way to fix this problem short of redesigning the system, which is why, even though you have great Scrum teams at the individual level, your system was composed in such a way that you'll never get the benefits if you did this. Sorry. Right? And it's going to happen up here organizationally. Now, here's what I didn't say. I did not say eliminate all component teams. That's the dogma. Let me give you an example. In New Orleans, I'm guessing, I'm sure it's right, the fire stations are distributed throughout the city. That was true? Our natives, okay. So, yeah, it would make no sense to have one centralized fire station in the middle of New Orleans, right? Because if a fire is burning on the perimeter of the city, by the time the trucks got out there, the structures would burn and people would die. Again, unacceptable. Cost of delay is too high. So what do? We take the fire personnel that could have been on a centralized component team, and we put those people out to fire stations distributed out the city. Those would be feature teams. Why? The economics favor doing that. The other situation, the economics didn't. On the other hand, I'm guessing again, but I bet that in the city of New Orleans, accounting is centralized. I see no particular advantage to distributing the accounting personnel all over the city, right? I can see putting payment offices around the city to make it easier for citizens to pay, but not to distribute accounting all over, because it seemed to economies of scale to have it centralized, plus security, right? Component team. So in the same city, I had some of my teams be feature teams and some of my teams be component teams. Why? Because the economics favored the individual choice in the context of the overall system design. Which is why you cannot blatantly make statements like all component teams bad, all feature teams good. You have to look at the economics of the choices that you're being presented and make the right choice. All right, let's tie this all off. By the way, not the. There is no the solution in this context. There are only compromises when you scale. Sorry, right? There's just compromises. One example here would be to take people off these component team areas and move them up onto feature teams. The benefit I would get by that is as I pull an item off that product backlog at the top, I can now present it back to the team. Notice what was missing in this picture. Where was the feature team? All I had was component teams. Now I got my feature team back. Now the people that we pulled up out of a component area, like that guy up there, he's got 2 responsibilities. He is both a pollinator and a harvester. He pollinates the feature team with knowledge of the component area, And he also gets to harvest back changes to the component area. It means he's still in this community of practice down here. He can come back and say, hey, guys, I need to make a change in the component area to support a feature I got to put in up here. I'd like to discuss that with you to make sure first that none of you have already done it, because maybe you've made the change, I could just reuse it. And I don't want to stomp on your toes, because I still do want reuse and conceptual integrity, which is why most companies went down this path to begin with. So I don't want to lose that. Because overall, my goal was that, again, to get the fast, flexible flow. So let me summarize then. I argued that if you perform all the Scrum practices using proven approaches to doing it, necessary but not sufficient if you want to be successful with Scrum. You need to apply Scrum in an economically sensible way, right? So they have to be based on this foundation of core Agile principles that we've been discussing that themselves are grounded in an economic framework that allows us to make sensible trade-offs. By the way, I will make these slides available so you do not have to worry about snapping pictures of all of them, all right? Sorry. And all the artwork in this I make available off my website in something that's called the Visual Agile Lexicon. So it's free to download if you want to put these things into your own presentations and go pound on your management. All right? So, there you go. Thank you. Is there questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Ken. It was a fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
Presentation.
Thanks, guys.
I'm sure that, are you around? So Ken is around the rest of the conference, so I'm sure that you'll all have questions for him, and not everybody at once, but maybe once in a while.
Great.
But we really appreciate you coming up here and helping us understand the overall complexity of it, and I'm sure everybody will be interested in the next sessions to go. They're all
Great.
rushing. I do have one important piece of information that I forgot to tell everybody this morning, and that is your pass, your conference badges, are your ticket to get in tonight. If you don't have your badge, you won't be allowed in, okay? There are a few people that have asked about taking guests. We have a limited number of guests spots available, and you can purchase a ticket for a guest if we have enough left, and just check with the ladies at the front. Okay, thanks again, Ken. Appreciate it.
Thank you.